What's up everybody, welcome back. So after a week of vacation, it's time to start making videos again, and we're gonna start with kind of a special one. So this is a re-upload of part number 30, and if you're here coming from part 29 and you think, what is this project? Well, it's actually the multiplayer project, but this is part 88, so it looks a little bit different than yours. But don't worry, you are watching the correct video. So there's two parts for this video. I'm gonna upload part 30A and part 30B. 30A is for people coming from part 29. They haven't added any spectator stuff yet. They are going to start from scratch, and they are also going to do everything that was in the old part 30 video. So for them, it's like nothing ever happened. They won't notice the difference. And for the people that are already further down in the series, they have the spectator in, but it's actually not working properly and they want to fix it. For those people, I'll be uploading part 30B. So make sure you watch the correct video and then everything should be fine. With all of that stuff out of the way, let's just dive in and fix this spectator. Or make it, depending on which video you're watching. So this is an old version of the project as it was after part 29, and from here we're gonna set everything up. We're gonna start in our hero base character, so let's open that one up first. Go to the viewport. So in here we want to add a few components, and we also want to make sure that our current spring arm is actually attached to our mesh and not our capsule component. So to make that happen, we're simply gonna drag this onto our mesh and that's it. So this is pretty important, especially for the spectating. If we don't attach it to our mesh, the movement will be really choppy because the mesh is the only thing that actually has the movement replicated, and the capsule component is actually teleporting position. So make sure we're going to attach a new spring arm to the mesh, and we're going to call this our Spectate spring arm. So add a new component and select the spring arm. I'm going to call this spring arm Spectate. And we want to make sure that we set the replication to component replicates over here. And on this spring arm spectate, we're going to add a child blueprint. So make sure you have the spring arm selected, and we're going to look for a child actor. And we can give this a name like a spectator target. So we have this one attached to our spring arm. What we want to do first is set up the blueprint in here. So make sure you have the child blueprint selected. And for the child actor class in here, we need to select a blueprint. And we're going to pick our view target that we created for the lobby. So we have a camera view target, and that's basically just an empty blueprint with an arrow in here. And the reason we're doing this is because we cannot assign an actor component as a view target. We need to actually assign an actor as a view target. So this is a little workaround. So we have the actor attached to our spring arm, and we need to make sure the spring arm has the same location and rotation as the original one. So let's make that happen as well. So for the original one, I have a rotation here of 90, but that's actually not correct, and it's also not doing anything because it's using the pawn control rotation. So you can set all of the rotations to 0, and then we need -40, 198. So we're gonna select our new spring arm and make sure we have the same location, like so. And we do need to rotate this one. So this isn't using the pawn control rotation because this is not actually controlling the character. So we're going to rotate this one 90 degrees. And we want to make sure that if we added rotation to our original camera, so over here I have -8 rotation on the pitch. We also set that for our spectator target. So select spectator target, -8 on the pitch. And now we actually have a duplicate of our spring arm and our camera that we're going to use for spectating. So for the spectator target, the child BP component, make sure we also set this one to component replicates. So that's pretty important. And then we have our components set up and good to go. So we can compile and save it, and we'll get back to the base character later. First of all, we're going to make a small setup in the shooter player controller. So let's go to the framework folder and open our shooter player controller. So in here, we want to create an event, and we're going to set it up later, but we want to have it in place. So that way we can set up the widget first and make sure we can put in all the calls in the widget. And then we'll go back to the player controller to finish this. So we're going to create a custom event in here, and let's call this Spectate after that. So this doesn't need to be replicated, that's fine. And the first thing we're going to do in here is set a variable. So let's create that one. We're going to create a new variable, and that's going to be is spectating, simply to tell if we're spectating or not. We're going to drag it in over here and set it to true. So that's all we're going to do for now. What we could do to make our lives a little bit easier to test this is simply add a keyboard key. So we can also press a number on the keyboard. So I'm going to say 0. And then we can test our spectating. So let's hook it up like this. And then we should be good to go for testing as well. So with this stuff in place, first of all, let's take a look at setting up the widget. So we have that out of the way. We're going to go to our widgets folder and open the player type menu. And in here we want to add a little border that tells the player which buttons he can use to change the spectator target and things like that. So let's set that one up first. I'm going to make this one invisible so it's not that annoying. And I'm going to start by dropping in a border over here. And let me check. So I'm going to make this 1200 wide and 100 in height. So over here, X 1200 and then 100. There we go. I got it anchored to the center of the screen. And then we're going to set it to -250. So 0 over here, -250 on the Y-axis. And then we can set the alignment to 0.5 to center it out. So that's actually a bit high, and this should be 250. Let's make it 230. Well, whatever, that's fine. So first of all, let's make the border black, like all of the borders in the project. So that kind of matches up. And in here, we want to start adding the buttons. So first of all, I'm going to grab a vertical box. Inside the vertical box, I'm going to drop a horizontal box. So for those, we need to make sure all of them are set to fill, so that should be good. The horizontal box over here, this should be set to vertical alignment top, and then we have over here fill selected and horizontal alignment fill, so that's good to go. And inside of this horizontal box, we're gonna actually drop a second horizontal box. So let's grab a second one. Over here, there we go. And in this horizontal box, we're going to set up the controls. And the first thing I want to drop in here is a size box. So let's drop that in the horizontal box. Select the size box, and then I'm going to enable the width override and the right. Okay, the width override and the height override. There we go. And we want to set both of them to 40. Then inside of the size box, I can drop a border. It's always a bit tedious, this widget stuff. So we're going to drop a border in here. And on top of this border, we can drop some text. There we go. So this border is going to represent the keyboard button that we have to press. So I'm going to make this a little bit grayish. So that's actually not too bad the way it is. So I'm going to leave it as is. And then the text is going to be the actual button that the player has to press. So I'm going to use Q for the cycling through the spectator target. So if the player presses Q, he's going to spectate the previous player. And if he presses E, he's going to spectate the next player. So that's what we're going to do in here. Make sure we have this set to fill. Oh, that's the text. Let me see. We want to align the text in the center over here. And then the button should be good. That's inside of the size box. So that's the actual button. And now we need to put some text to the side of it to tell what the button does. So we're going to grab a second text box, block and drop that inside of the horizontal box over here. So let's grab the correct font. Let's copy and paste that one over here. And we can probably shrink the text down a little bit. So I've got this set to 18 over here in my example project. 18. And then I'm simply going to say spectate previous player. Previous player. Oh, really? And we probably want to center it out. So vertical alignment, center, and that should be good to go. So now we can grab this last horizontal box that we added and we can simply duplicate it. So the text in the center is going to be for respawning. So I'm going to set the letter here to R for respawn. And then the text is going to be simply respawn. And then we can grab the horizontal box again and we're going to duplicate it 1/3 time. And for this one, I want the button to be on the right side and the text on the left side. So I'm simply going to drag the text above the size box over here. So it'll switch around. And for this, I'm going to say spectate next player. And we're going to use the E key for this one, or at least I'm going to use the E key. So set it to E. And now all we need to do is the alignments in here. So for the last one, if we select it, we want to set it to fill over here and then align it to the right side and vertical fill, that should be good. Then we're going to go to the middle box for respawning. And for this one, we want to set it to fill as well. And then for horizontal alignment, center. And vertical alignment fill, that's fine. And then this should be pretty good if we select the first horizontal box. So I got it set to auto and fill, so that's good to go. Yeah, that looks halfway decent. I can live with that. So we have that one in place, and now we can grab another horizontal box over here, and we're gonna drop that on top of the vertical box. So where did it go? Oh, really? There it is. And in here we also just want to drop some text. So let me just copy the text from here and paste it in here. And in here we're going to put the name of the player that we're currently spectating. So this is going to change. Let's call this player name. We're going to set it in the actual graph later. So we do want to center it out probably. So if we set it to fill and then center and then alignment bottom, then we should be good to go. Now what we want to do is grab the actual border that we used over here, and we're going to give this a name and make it a variable so we can hide and show it. So this is the border spectator controls. Make sure we enable is variable over here, and then we're going to set the default visibility to hidden. So by default we won't see it. And we also want to make sure that our spectator player name is a variable so that we can change that as well. So over here, the last text that we entered, we're going to change it. Text player name spectating, maybe. And we want to make sure this is a variable as well. So enable that one. And then we have the widget designer part done. So that's fine. Let's compile and save it, and let's start setting up the graph. So let's dive into the graph first, and that shouldn't be too bad. The first thing we want to do in our event construct, let's make sure that all of the borders visibility is correct. So in case we open up the spectator or player died menu for the second time. So we're going to grab our border default buttons over here, and then the pop-up are you sure, and the border for the spectator controls. So we want to make sure the default buttons are visible if we open it. So we're going to set the visibility and make sure those are actually visible. And then for the other two, we want to make sure those are hidden. So let's set it up like this and make sure we hook everything up. So that's good to go. Then we want to go down a little bit, and we already have a button in here for respawning. So that's going to call the respawn after that on the player controller. So what we want to do in here, we're going to set the is spectating boolean locally for the player. So we're going to drag it out here. We're going to drag off the shooter player controller, and we're going to set is spectating. And we're going to set it back to false immediately after pressing the respawn button. So make sure it's false over here. And then we also want to make sure that we grab the button spectate. And I think we already added this in the previous video, but it's been about a year or so. So if you don't have this button in here, just duplicate one of these buttons and give it a proper text and a proper name. So you have a button to spectate players as well. And then for that button, we want to create an on-clicked event. So let's add one. And what we want to do in here is simply grab this stuff. So we're going to grab the shooter player controller. We're going to set is spectating to true. And then we're going to call our spectate after that event that we added in the beginning of the video and that we still need to set up, but at least we have the call in place. So that's good to go. And now we need two small functions to update our player name and the visibility of the spectator controls. So let's add a new function in here and call the first one update spectator player name. Or spectator name, that's fine. And that's not too hard either. So we're simply going to grab our text, player name spectating, and we're going to set the text. So we can pass on the text as a variable, and that's the actual player name. So plug it in and change the name over here. So that's already good to go. And then for the second function, we're going to call that something like show spectator controls. And in here, we're actually going to add a boolean so we can hide and show it with the same function. So let's add a boolean as input and call this is visible. Yeah, that should work. And then we're going to add a branch in here. And we simply want to hide and show it depending on if we want to see it or not. So we're going to grab our spectator controls and then also the pop-up are you sure and the default buttons. So if we actually want to show the spectator controls, we want to hide these ones. So we're going to set the visibility again. If this is true, we're going to hide the default buttons and the border are you sure. And we're going to show our spectator controls. Visible and plug this one in. And if we don't want to see it, we want to do it the other way around. So we're going to plug it in like this. Only in this case, we don't want to set the pop-up are you sure to visible. So we're only going to set the default buttons to visible. And then we're going to hide the spectator controls again. And that should be good to go. So we have our widget set up, and now we can dive back into our shooter player controller to do the biggest part of the setup. So let's go back to our framework shooter player controller. And the first thing, let's do setting up the events to call our widget stuff. So we're actually going to make this run on the local player controller, so we don't need to worry about replicating to the owning client. We can simply call our widget directly. So we're going to call create a custom event, and let's call the first one show spectator controls. And for this, we want to grab our player dive menu in here, and we're going to call our new function. So show spectator controls, make sure we set them to visible. Then we want to hide the mouse cursor. So let's right click on the player controller and look for show mouse cursor. We want to set it to false. No. And then we're going to set the input mode to game only. So if we drag over here again and set game only, there we go. So that should be show spectator controls, and then we want one to update the player name. And for that one, we actually need to replicate it to the owning client because we need to have the server grab the player name for us. So we don't have access to player controllers of other clients. So it's hard for us to get the name of another client. So we need to make sure the server does that for us and then tells it back to us. So we're going to create a custom event, and this is going to be update HUD spectator player name. There we go. So this is going to be replicated to run on the owning client, and all we want to do in here is grab our player died menu and call the function. So that's update spectator player name, and then simply pass on the actual name as a variable. So now that we have those set up, let's see, we're gonna set up the functions that we need for actually spectating. So updating the spectator targets and then starting the actual spectating. So let me grab my notes in here quickly. Let's create a new function and call the first one spectator update targets. Nope. So this will simply get all the players in the level that we can spectate. So if it's team deathmatch, we're not going to get the players on our team, and players that are dead, we won't be able to spectate them, things like that. So that's what we're going to do in here. And we need a few variables. So we're going to create them as well. The first one is all spectator targets. And this is going to be an array of hero base characters. So let's look for a hero base and turn it into an array. And then we also need our current spectator target. So let's add that one as well. Current spectator target. So that's also a hero base, but just a single variable, not an array. And let's set up the last variables as well, then we have them out of the way. So we need a boolean, and that's called, sorry, not a boolean, we need an integer to tell which one of the items in the array we're spectating. So this is the spectator target index. And we're going to turn it into an index. So coming into this function, first we're going to grab our all spectator targets array and we're going to clear it to make sure we start fresh. And we want to get all of the players in the level. So we're going to drag off here, get all actors of class. And we want to get all of the hero base characters. Like so. And then we can start looping through them to see if they are valid targets or not. So let's grab a for each loop. And the first thing we could do is simply do an isValid check to make sure it's not already being deleted or about to be deleted. So let's grab an isValid check. Then we're gonna drag off here and we're gonna make sure we are player controlled. So let's look for is player controlled. Oh, freaking really. There we go. So this will make sure we only get actual players. So we're gonna grab a branch, plug it in here, and hook it up as well. And then we also probably want to know if the target is alive. So let's drag off the hero base and we can get our is alive boolean. And simply hook that up to a branch as well. And if all of those conditions are true, then we should be good to go. So we're going to grab our spectator targets array and we're going to add an item to it. Hook this up to the true pin, and then we're simply going to add the array element over here. So if this for each loop is done, we have all of the targets stored in our spectator array, and then we're going to double check if we're currently spectating a target, and if we are, we want to update the target index. So the order of the array might have changed, so then we also need to make sure we have our index updated. So we're going to grab our current spectator target and we're going to check if this is valid or not. Hook it up to the completed pin. And if it's actually valid, we're going to grab all of our spectator targets and we're going to find our current spectator target. So find item, plug in the current target over here, and this will return the index. So now we can grab our spectator target index is valid, we're going to set it over here. If we don't have a spectator target, we're simply going to set the index over here to -1. So that's not a valid index either. Okay, that should be everything to update the targets. And then we're going to add another function to actually start spectating and to cycle through the targets. So let's add a new function and call this spectator start spectate target. Spectator start spectate target. Fine. And then we can add a boolean in here that tells us if we want to cycle up or down through the targets. So I'm going to add a boolean and call this previous. So that should be good. First of all, let's check the branch to determine which way we want to cycle through the array. No, that's not true, by the way. First, we're going to check if our array is actually bigger than 1. So if it's not, we don't need to cycle through it anyway. So let's grab a branch. Let's grab our spectator targets array over here. We're going to drag off and get the length. And we want to make sure the length is greater than 1. So let's look for greater than and plug in 1 over here. That's the first condition. And if this is false, then we can simply set the spectator target index over here to 0. So that should be good to go. Let's drag this out of the way. Then we can check our previous or next boolean to determine which way we want to cycle through the array. So let's plug in a second branch, hook it up to the input of the function. And then we simply want to make sure that we grab a valid index. So over here, if this is true, then we want to cycle downwards. So we're going to select the previous target. So in that case, we need to know if we're already at 0 or not. So we're going to grab a branch and we want to get our spectator target index. So that's the current index that we're using. And if this is smaller than or equal to 0, so also if we set it to -1 if it's not valid. So let's do a smaller than or equal to, plug it in here. So if this is true, then our new target is going to be the last index of the array. And to make our lives a little bit easier, we can store it in a local variable. So let's create a local variable and call this new index. So that's an integer, and then we can drag it in over here, set it to plug it into the true pin. We're going to grab the spectator targets array and get the last index. And then we can simply hook it up and that's good to go. So if we're not at the bottom of the array, we can simply subtract 1 of it. So we can grab our spectator target index over here, do -1. Oh, really? And then we can store it in our local variable again. So plug this one into the false bin and make sure you hook everything up. And if we want to cycle upwards through the array, we need to make sure we're not already at the last index. So we're going to grab a branch again. And in this case, we're going to check if the spectator target index is equal to, and then the last index of the array. So we can grab all spectator targets last index, plug it in here. So that's the condition. Make sure you hook that up as well. And if this is true, then we want to start at the beginning again. So we're going to grab our new index and simply set it back to 0. And if this is false, then we can simply add 1 to our current index. So grab the spectator target index, add 1 to it, and store it in the local new index. There we go. So we have those branches set up, and then first of all, let's hook them up to a setter for our spectator target index over here, and make sure that we grab all 5 of the branches and hook them up. Like so. In here, we're going to set it to the new index. So let's hook that one up, and then we're going to grab all of our spectator targets, get a copy, and plug it in here as well. So to make sure this is still valid and we don't need to update our spectator targets at at a rate that's not acceptable, we're going to do a double check to make sure it's still valid in here. So we're going to drag off here, do is valid, hook it up over here. Oh, come on. So if this is not valid, then we can grab our current spectator target index again, and we're simply going to set it to -1 over here. And then we also want to grab our current spectator target and make sure that one is cleared, so we don't have any references set in here. And if this is actually valid, then we can set it. So we're going to set our spectator target to the result of the get node over here, so the get spectator target index. And after we did that, so this is our hero base character, we can drag off here and get our spectator target component that we created at the beginning of the video. So that's the child blueprint. So we want to get the spectator target. So that's the component all the way at the bottom over here. And this is actually the child actor blueprint component. So what we want to do from here is get the actual child actor. So get child actor. Oh. This one, and that's the actual actor blueprint. So that's what we need to plug in our set view target with blend node. So that's what we're going to do next. Drag over here and set a view target with blend. And then we're simply going to set it to our child actor over here. So that's the new view target. So for the blend time, you can play around with it to smooth things out a little bit. I'm going to make it pretty quick. So I'm going to set it to 0.5 seconds. So every time we switch targets, it goes pretty fast. Okay, that should be it. So we can grab a return node over here. And this is good to go. So this is a much neater way to do the spectating. In our previous setup, we actually spawned a new character and attached that to the player, so that was a bit heavy as well. So this is a much lighter setup, so that's pretty nice. Compile and save it, that's good to go. Let's go back into the event graph and do some extra setup. So as I mentioned, we need to make sure that the server can get the spectator player name for us. And we also want to create a server event for that. So let's do that one. And let's grab my notes in here. So that's not too bad either. Create a custom event, and that's going to be server get spectator player name. Spectator player name. There we go. This is going to be replicated to run on the server. So it's going to be called from the client, and we're going to plug in our spectator target over here. So let's add an input, spectator target, and this is actually going to be a hero base character. So now from here we can drag off and get our shooter player controller. Oop. This one, and from the shooter player controller we can get the player profile. And from the profile, we can get the player name. So drag off here, break the profile, and there we have the name. And now we can make the server call our update HUD spectator target on the client to actually tell us the correct name. So over here, we're going to call update HUD spectator player name. Plug in the name, and that's good to go. So we need a few input events as well for the buttons that we added to the widget. So if we want to do this properly, we would set up actual inputs in the project settings. But because this is Unreal 5.0 and we're actually going to move on to 5.1 at a later stage in the project where we set up the enhanced inputs, we need to change it again anyway. So for now, I'm just going to use keyboard presses. It's a little bit easier to set up. So I'm going to look for keyboard Q. So that was the previous target. Then we're also going to add keyboard E. So that was for the next target. Keyboard E. And we also want the respawn button. So that was the R key. Keyboard R. That's all the way down here. There we go. So first of all, let's start with the Q one. So we want to make sure that we are spectating. So we're going to grab a branch and plug in our isSpectating bool. And if that's true, then we can first call our update targets function to make sure the targets are up to date. And then we can call our start spectate target. And over here, we're going to set it to previous. So we'll cycle down the list. And then after that, we can grab the current spectator target over here and check if it's valid or not. So this doesn't necessarily need to return a valid target if there's no valid target in the level. So that's why we're double checking it over here. And if this is valid, we're going to make sure that the server gets the correct name for us. So then we can call our server get spectator player name. Like so, and then simply hook in our spectator target. So that was the Q key, and we want to do the same thing for the E key. So we can copy and paste it over here, hook it up to the pressed pin, and all we need to change is the boolean. So set it to false and it will cycle the other way through the array. And then make sure you also hook it up to the isValid node so that it also updates the spectator player name. That's good to go, and then we have our respawn button. So we also want to check if we're spectating or not. If that's true, we're going to set spectating back to false over here. And then we want to clear some stuff. So we're going to grab all of our spectator targets and we're going to clear them. And we're also going to clear the current spectator target. So let's drag in an empty setter. And let's reset the index as well. So target index, and we're going to set it to -1. And after that, we can simply call our respawn after that event. And that will make the character respawn. So that's good to go as well. And now there's one thing I want to do as well, and that's move over the pause game event from the hero base character to our spectator target, to our player controller, because we're going to unpossess our hero base character, and because we have it unpossessed, we can't use the input events on the character anymore. So if we want to pause the game while we are spectating, or we want to access the pause menu because we can't actually pause it in multiplayer, then we run into trouble if we don't put an event on our player controller. So in here, I'm going to look for the input pause game, and that should be in here by default, or not by default, but we added it in a previous episode. And then we want to get our GameInstance. So we need to cast it to our shooter GameInstance over here. And we actually have a function on here to toggle pause game. So look for toggle pause game. And this branch will return if the game is paused or not. So let's hook up a branch to it. The bool will return, sorry. And then we want to make sure that we hide a HUD if we have it on screen. So if this is actually successful and the pause menu is displayed, we're going to grab a second branch and grab our player HUD. Drag off here and make sure that it's valid. So this time I'm going to use the green one, the function one that we can hook up as a boolean. And we're also going to get is in viewport. I think. Oh, we don't want to type get in here, so is in viewport. There we go. So if it's valid and it's actually visible, then we're going to hide it. So let's drag off here, grab an end node, plug it in. That's our condition. And then we're going to grab our HUD and set the visibility. So we're not actually going to delete the entire HUD. We're simply going to hide it for now. And set it to hidden. So that's good to go as well. Okay, so those are the input events. Now we want to finish our spectate after that event. So that's what we added at the beginning of the video, where we only added the empty event. So let's go back over here, and as I mentioned, this is going to run on the local player controller, and we want to make sure that we actually unpossess our current hero base character. And if we want to unpossess something, the server needs to do it. So we need to replicate something in here. First of all, we're going to grab a has authority branch. So if we are the server, the local controller can be the server's one. So we need to make sure we actually determine if we are the server or not. If we are the server, we can simply call unpossess ourselves, and we don't need to worry about replication. If we are a client, we need to have the server do it for us. So we need to right click, create a custom event, and call this server unpossess. There we go. So this is set to run on the server, and then we want to simply call unpossess over here. And we can call it over here on the remote pin, like so. But now we run into a tiny little issue, not really an issue, but we need to wait for the server to actually unpossess the character, and that needs to be successful before we can continue. But we are the local instance and this is the server instance, so they don't directly talk to each other. So we need to make sure that we know when the server is done unpossessing. So what we could do is grab an event unpossessed. So let's look for that one, event on unpossess. So that will fire when the player controller unpossesses a pawn. And what we can do in here is simply add a tiny delay of 0.1 seconds. It doesn't really matter as long as we give it a few ticks. And then we're going to set a boolean to true, and that boolean is replicated, so that will tell the client that the server is done unpossessing. So let's create a new boolean and call this trigger unpossessed. And we're going to make it a bool and make sure that it's replicated. So over here, we can drag it in and set it to true. Then if we go back to the switch has authority, over here, the two unpossessed nodes, we're going to grab a branch. And we're simply going to check the bool. So we're going to check the trigger unpossessed. And if the bool is still false, we want to wait. So we're going to grab a delay until next tick. And then hook it back up to the branch again. And only if it's true, we're going to continue. So if this is true, then we can call our show spectator controls. So let's drag off here, show spectator controls. Then we want to update the targets, so we can drag in that function. And then we want to start spectating, so let's drag that one in as well. And then it's pretty simple. We need to do the isValid check and then make the server get the player name. So we can copy this part, isValid current spectator target, and then call the server get spectator player name. So we also want to do that over here. Plug it in. And then we're going to grab another switch has authority to reset our trigger boolean. So let's grab has authority over here. Make sure we also hook up the is not valid pin, so we don't have any loose ends in here. And then if we are the server, we can simply grab the bool and set it back to false over here. And if we are a client, we need the server to do it for us. So we're going to create a custom event and call this server reset trigger. So again, this is run on server, set to run on server, sorry, replication. And then in here we can, in here we can set our boolean back to false. And then make sure the client calls this server reset trigger. Okay, so that should be good to go as well. And now there's only one small thing that we want to do in here. And let's go to our respawn after that over here. I'm pretty sure. Let me double check. Yeah. And over here, we want to get rid of this boolean. So respawn after that respawn, we're simply going to disconnect this one and delete it. And after we did that, I think we should be, no, we're not. Okay, so we're going to get back to this in a little bit. So basically we have all of the spectator stuff done, and that should pretty much work. There's actually also a little bit of optimization that was in the old part 30 video, and I also need to make sure that we do that in this video as well, otherwise the rest of the tutorial won't match anymore. So first of all, we're going to do some optimization for spawning the player controller and the HUD and things like that, and then we should be good to go. I was a little bit too fast. We're not really done with the spectator. There's a few small things on the hero base character. So let's open our hero base character. And what we want to do in here, in the event graph, we have the input action pause game event, and we move that over to our player controller. So we're going to simply delete it from our hero base character. So over here, input action pause game, that's exactly the same as we did on the controller. So we're going to get rid of it over here. The next thing we want to do is make sure that this pawn is actually being deleted if we unpossess it. So we're going to right click and look for event unpossess. Unpossessed, that's fine as well. And in here we simply want to call destroy actor. So if the player controller unpossesses the pawn, the actor will be deleted, otherwise we run into some issues. Okay, and with that stuff in place, there are two optional things that you can do. So this is for the spectating. We could add the new aim rotation over here. So that's simply the aim rotation of the player, and set it onto the spectator arm spectate. So if you do this, then the player that is spectating will not be allowed to look around for himself, and he will simply follow the viewpoint of the player he is spectating. And if you don't hook it up, like I'm gonna do right now, then the player that is spectating will actually be able to look around, and he will not follow the player's view rotation. So you can kind of, well, try both and see what you like most, or simply do one and leave out the other. Simply what you prefer. So what we want to do inside of our event tick over here, all the way at the end, we're going to grab our spectator Springarm, and for this we're going to set the relative location, relative rotation, that's my bad. And then we can simply plug in our new aim rotation over here, so we don't need to replicate any new variables to make this work, so it's pretty simple to add. What we do want to make sure is that we also add it in the server set aim rotation. So we simply want to grab this part and paste it over here. Already, and then simply hook it up as well. So this is optional. You can unplug it and see if what works better for you. And then if we go to our Springarm spectate over here, then we probably want to enable some camera lag. So we're going to enable camera lag and rotation lag. And you can play around with the settings of the speed and the maximum rotation lag speed and things like that. But this will be this tiny bit of extra smoothing out, especially if you are playing on a low latency. Okay, so that's actually the entire spectator stuff, and now we're gonna get to the optimization part. And we actually want to do that inside of our hero base character. So the first thing we want to do is look for our event possessed over here. And we're going to change this up a little bit. So event possessed on our hero base character is now immediately calling our multicast begin play. So that's not what we're going to do anymore. We're going to get rid of this call. We can simply delete it. And we're going to make sure that the player controller will make the call to our multicast begin play. So first the player controller is going to create the HUD and set everything up. And then it's going to fire our begin play on our character. And if we do it like that, we have a little bit less trouble with the HUD being invalid and things like that. So we can start by simply removing the call for the multicast like I did over here. And the next thing we want to do is go to our actual event begin play. So over here, and if we scroll to the right, then we run into a cast for the shooter player controller, and we want to get rid of this one. So what we're going to do, we're going to grab the delay over here, the cast to the player controller and the setter for it, and we're going to get rid of this stuff. So let's disconnect it. There we go. Over here we can simply plug in our variable. So we're going to grab our shooter player controller, plug it into the struct pin over here, so that still works. And we want to grab this pin over here and simply hook it up to the for each loop. Yeah, so that should be good to go. We can get rid of this stuff, and we don't need this anymore either. So that was step 2. Then step 3 is go back to our event possessed. And we're gonna change this up a little bit. So let's disconnect it over here. First, we're gonna cast to our shooter player controller in here. So cast to shooter player controller. And then we can set it as well. So drag in the setter and hook it up. Then we want to check our death respawn boolean. So let's plug that one in. And if this is true, then we're gonna set our death respawn to true. So make sure the setter is actually set to true. It wasn't in my case, so that could have been a mistake. And then we can call our disable all input for the false pin. So we're only gonna disable input the first time we spawn into the game where we have the countdown. And if we die in respawn, we're not gonna do that. So that's done as well. Then we want to go back to our begin play over here. And we can get rid of the input for the player controller. So simply delete that. We don't need that one anymore. And then we're going to go to the right a little bit. So we have the branch over here is locally controlled is true. And we want to grab that branch. Make a little bit of room in here. And what we want to do in here is set our HUD variable. So we can grab the shooter player controller and we can get our in-game HUD. And then we can grab a setter on our character over here. Plug that in. And from here we can call our update health. And we want to plug in our health variable. Like so. So plug this one back into the cast for the animation blueprint. And now we should have the player part done. Let me double check. Yeah, that should be good to go. So now to finish this up and make sure it's actually working, we need to go back to our shooter player controller. And let me grab the correct nodes in here as well. So what we want to do in our player controller. First of all, let's go to our event on possess. So let me see. Over here. Oh, that's unpossess. Over here, on possess. So that's the one we want. And what we are going to do in here is actually not much. We're simply going to get rid of all of this stuff and only call our multicast begin play. So this is the begin play on the shooter player controller and not on the character. We can get rid of this stuff. So set HUD variable, we're not doing that anymore. And we're also not using the death respawn boolean on the player controller anymore. So delete that stuff and then also delete the actual variable in here. We don't need it. And we can also get rid of this event, local set HUD variable. We are not using that anymore either. So we just place this on the hero base character. So let's delete that as well. Then we want to go to our begin play event. And over here we actually have our custom event and the normal event begin play hooked up. So we want to get rid of the normal No, that's not correct. We want to get rid of the normal event begin play and keep our custom multicast one. So make sure you do it like this, and then let me see, we're going to go to the end of the event over here. And we're going to change this up a little bit. So what we want to make sure is after all this is done, then we're going to fire the begin play event on the character. So if we actually are the server, we can do it directly. So we can right click over here, get our controlled pawn. And from our controlled pawn, we can cast to our hero base character. Freaking tooltips. They're always blocking my view. So cast to hero base, plug it in, and simply call our multicast begin play. There we go. So that's the server side. And if we are a client, we need to make sure the server does it for us. So we can right click and create a custom event. Do we actually need to do that? Well, no, not really, because over here we have the server set player profile. That's actually run on server and that's already being called. So what we could do is simply hook this one up over here to the cast hero base and then call multicast begin play. Okay, so that should work. And now there is one thing left to do in here. No, not even, because we already removed the local set HUD variable event, so that's good to go. So this is actually all of the stuff that was in the previous video, and there is one tiny thing that I want to do, and that's actually something we do later in the series, but it's going to improve the reliability, so I decided to add it in here just in case people have issues with it. And what that is we're going to make sure that we load our player profile much sooner than we do right now. So we're going to do it and then I'll explain. So let's right click and create a custom event on the player controller and call this load profile. Nearly. So we want to set the replication for this event to run on the owning client. And then we can actually grab a part of our begin play. So this is going to be a little bit messy. So in begin play, we have load game from slot, cast to the save game, set the player profile. And here comes the messy part. So we have the switch has authority and then set the player profile. So that's the stuff we need. So let's disconnect this part over here as well. And we're going to move that to our load profile event, like so. So at the end over here, we have the branch. The server can set the variable himself, and the client needs to have the server do it. But we actually just hooked that event up over here. So we're going to disconnect it again. I'm sorry, it's a bit messy, I know. So we want to keep those separated. So that should work like this. And then we need to go back to our event begin play to make sure that actually is working. So we want to hook this one back up to a new has authority node. And then we're going to go, oh freak, that's not the correct one. So let's make clear where we're doing this. Inside of begin play, after UI show in-game HUD, we're going to grab a new has authority node. Plug it in over here. And then we're going to grab the multicast begin play that the server needs to call. So we're going to hook this up to the has authority pin. And now we need to create a server replicated event because we just moved the other event out of the place. So we're going to create a new custom event and call this server character begin play. So this is going to run on the server. Plug it into the cast and make sure that the client calls it over here. Server character begin play. So that's fixed again. And now we need to make sure that this event is being called at the proper time. So we need to do that inside of our shooter game mode. And I'm actually going to grab my notes quickly to make sure I don't mess up. So let's open our shooter game mode. And over here, we want to go to our handle, event handle starting new player. So that's inside of our event graph. So previously, the player controller only started loading the profile after it possessed the character. And what we can do right now, because we have a separate event for it, as soon as we cast it to the player controller, we're going to drag off here and we're going to load the profile. So as soon as the player controller is in the level, it's going to start loading the profile to make sure that the information is available as soon as possible. So this will make sure things will run a little bit smoother without any hiccups. So that should be everything, and that's also the optimization done. So now we should be good to go, and we can have a little test for the spectating. So let's go in game and make sure we have a 2-player game. So remember, I also added the keybind, so I can simply press a button and then I can test the respawning. The downside on that one is that it will not show the correct spectator controls and things like that, because we don't have our player died menu on screen if we press the button. So the proper way to test this would be to die. So I think that's possible. I think we have enemies in the map over here, but I'm not sure. We do. So let's make sure this guy is killing me. I can spectate, and then over here I can run around, and that's actually working. It's somewhat working. So the rotation is not updating correctly because I'm turning around the character right now. Okay, so I messed up something with the rotation. I'm gonna have a look at that and I'll tell you guys the fix in a second. Okay, that wasn't too bad. It's a few tick boxes as it usually is in Unreal. So if we go to our hero base character, the Springarm Spectate, we want to select that one and make sure we disable the inherit, pitch yaw and roll. So we want to turn all 3 of those off, and that should be good to go. And we also want to go back to our shooter player controller, and in here for the show spectator controls event, at the end I added the set input mode game only. We need to hook up a player controller, otherwise it will throw errors and warnings. So we can simply hook up a reference to ourselves and that should be good. Okay, so with these tick boxes set correctly, this should work now. So let's test again to make sure. And then we are done for today. There we go. Start the game. So let's make sure this guy's killing me again. And I'm gonna spectate. And this time, if I move the camera, you will see my spectator is actually moving in the same direction. So that's a lot better. So that's working. It's a bit hard to test the previous and next player, but that should work fine. And over here, we should also be able to respawn. So if I go to the client screen and do this fast enough, hit R, then I will respawn. And now the other player died and he can spectate me. And that's also working, as you can see. So that's the new spectating, and this will also work in a standalone game, so this is much better than it used to be. I'm sorry for the re-upload, it's not something I do often, but in this case it was necessary, so we did it. Thanks for watching everybody, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. And for the people that are actually updating a newer version of the project, so after part 30, we're gonna start here.